Picture, if you will, the south of France in 1943. Within a desolate asylum, a white-haired elderly woman sits in silence in a corner. Her hands are heavily calloused, yet they have not touched the earth for decades. Only her eyes remain sharp, as if still tracing the contours of some non-existent silhouette in the air. No one knew that this old woman, abandoned by her family for 30 long years, was once Paris's most dazzling genius of sculpture, whose talent once made even the great Rodin tremble with awe. Her name was Camille Claudel. Tonight, by the soft pulse of the firelight, let us traverse the path of her true life through this story, one you need not labor to remember. It is a life that elegantly broke through the ramparts of patriarchy, only to collapse utterly upon the ruins of love. She was once Rodin's most perfect muse, yet in the end, she chose to shatter her own works and enter 30 years of confinement and silence. This is a tale of extreme love, extreme art, and an extreme self that the era simply could not tolerate. Let us quiet our breathing and, in the company of the night, slowly trace the cold and eternal fate that feels like weathered marble. The fissures in her story began on a Parisian afternoon in 1883, heavy with the scent of damp clay. That year, 19-year-old Camille entered Auguste Rodin's studio, her fiery intuition instantly striking a chord with the middle-aged master. Rodin once remarked that Camille was the only rival with whom he could discuss art as an equal. Her presence infused the gates of hell with an unprecedented carnal tension. In the dark hours of creative nights, they stood side by side, chisels in hand, cleaving gaps of life into the cold stone. Camille was more than an apprentice, she was the invisible soul behind Rodin's most magnificent works, the one who could make cold marble appear to breathe. Yet, this intellectual resonance was swiftly distorted by societal fetters into a doomed game of power. As a woman in such an era, all her achievements were relegated to mere footnotes beneath Rodin's brilliance. People even whispered that her works were ghostwritten. More fatally, she poured out her entire heart, only to find she could never displace Rodin's so-called stable life. This overdrawn talent and denied affection planted the first seeds of brokenness in her heart. She sought an exit through the clay, only to find herself walled in by the towering ramparts of authority, where every inch of air felt suffocating. When one is repeatedly deceived in a state of absolute purity, the internal order begins a terrifying collapse. Camille finally realized that Rodin never intended to truly formalize their relationship, nor did he intend to grant her an independent standing in the art world. She chose to break away, a severance so absolute it bordered on self-torture. Moving into a dark, damp studio, she began a solitary death match with fate. During those days, she produced the legendary masterpiece The Mature Age, a harrowing confession of a supplicant kneeling at the feet of a cold destiny. She attempted to reclaim her sovereignty through her work, only to find that the Parisian critics still defined her as Rodin's shadow. Plagued by chronic poverty and social exclusion, fine cracks began to appear in her mental defenses. The thought that Rodin was stealing her ideas became a haunting nightmare. Driven by extreme insecurity, she began to seal herself off, with only the heavy thud of the chisel against stone echoing through the streets at night. In the eyes of her neighbors, she grew increasingly eccentric, suspecting every passing stranger of being a spy sent by Rodin. This paranoia, nurtured in isolation, was in fact a genius's final and most desperate rebellion against a cold world. She wanted to prove her existence, but the world conspired to erase her through the weapon of silence. Following a storm in 1913, Camille's life plunged into permanent darkness. Merely 8 days after the death of her father, the sole pillar of her life, her family moved with haste to commit her to an asylum. Her brother, the renowned diplomat and poet Paul Claudel, personally signed the order for her confinement. On the eve of being forcibly taken away, Camille seemed to possess a premonition. She raised a hammer and shattered nearly every plaster cast in her studio. Those clay figures, representing a lifetime of labor and once possessing the rhythm of breath, were reduced to dust on the floor in a single night. She was not mad, she was lucidly aware that if the world was unworthy of her talent, she would destroy it with her own hands. From then on, the genius who had sent ripples through the Parisian art scene vanished, replaced by the silent patient No. 150-inch in a sanatorium. This exile would last 30 years. During that time, Paul wrote countless poems praising life and divinity, yet he rarely visited the sister he had locked behind bars. Her mother never once stepped foot in the asylum, leaving Camille to wither in desolation. This betrayal by kith and kin was a cold far deeper than Rodin's departure, turning her into a literal statue of marble in her final years. In those 30 years of silence, Camille Claudel had actually discovered another form of freedom. She refused to ever sculpt again. Regardless of the asylum director's persuasion, she would only shake her head and say, "I do not wish to create anything that can be destroyed again." In letters, she begged her family to let her return home, even promising to live in the stables, but most of those letters went unanswered. Amidst the monotonous routine of the madhouse, She began to observe the drifting clouds and the veins of fallen leaves, completing masterpieces in her mind that would never see the light of day. This transition from extreme fever to extreme tranquility was a genius's self-imposed exile, a silent scorn for a mediocre age. She once told a nurse, "As long as I do not carve those images, Rodin can never steal them." In her final decade, she seemed to have forgotten the bone-deep hatreds. Her gaze became as clear as a washed lake. She was no longer Rodin's rival, nor the Claudel family's shame. She was simply Camille, a sculptor who had achieved self-redemption in the depths of her soul. In 1943, amidst the smoke of World War II, this great artist passed away quietly in solitude. Her funeral was meager, lacking even a proper headstone, and she was eventually buried in a pauper's grave because no one claimed her remains. Her life appeared utterly shattered, yet from those fragments, there remains a glimmer, perhaps the most poignant and indelible light in the history of human art. As we look back upon the life of Camille Claudel tonight, it is hard not to be moved by her shattered jade tragic heroism. She demonstrated a possibility, that one can sustain such a vast spiritual territory in the darkness through nothing but an obsession with truth. Although many of her traces upon the earth were erased, in her surviving sculptures, we can still hear the marble breathe and feel a vitality that tore through the era. She was no longer Rodin's muse, she was herself, a pioneer who sowed her soul in the clay. Our story for tonight has ended. I hope what this saint of sculpture has given you is not a sigh of sorrow, but a rare sense of equanimity. In this tranquil hour, may you also lay down all resentment and entanglement, finding, like the elderly Camille, the purest peace in that undisturbed wilderness of the heart. Now, let your breath become as gentle as a spring breeze, and sink into a dreamland that is yours alone, solid and serene. The world may occasionally forget the truth, but the earth remembers the weight of every stone. Good night.